Hi guys, it's Michelle. Happy October. I'm literally so excited. It's almost Christmas, so time to go. Today's video is going to be another reincarnation stories video. I love doing these videos because they're super interesting, but they also freak me out because the thought of reincarnation, like, I don't like it. Like, I understand a lot of people find peace in it. A lot of people like have that as like part of their religion, and I totally get it. But like for me, it really freaks me out, the thought of like coming back in like this life kind of like just being non-existent. I don't know, like it really does scare me. At the same time, it's like I'm almost inclined to believe it because of these crazy stories that happen. They're kind of just unexplainable. So let's get into it. So the first story is absolutely insane, and it is about a little boy named Sam Taylor. Okay, so I'm editing this video and I have a few additions. When I found this story, I was kind of confused because like I couldn't find much information on it besides what I saw, and they kept referring to him as Sam Taylor the kid. But I finally found the video that like goes with the story, so I'll link that below as well. But his name was Gus Taylor, so I just wanted to clarify that. I don't know where the internet got Sam from because I saw this story on several websites and it always said Sam, but his name was Gus. So Sam Taylor was from Vermont, and he was born a year and a half after his grandfather passed away. When Sam was around 1.5 years old, his dad was changing his diaper and he looked up at him and said, "I used to change your diapers when I was your age." Literally, I would this is also part 2 why I don't even want to have kids, because that would freak me out. I mean, I guess it's like beautiful in some ways, but it would just like really scare me. So obviously his parents were like kind of weirded out by that. They thought it was like strange, but they didn't really think of reincarnation. They had grown up in like kind of like a religious background, so they weren't really concerned with like reincarnation, or didn't even think that that was necessarily a possibility. Following this incident, Sam began to constantly say that he was his grandfather, like that he used to be his father's dad. And this began to like concern the parents a little bit. Like the mother was a little bit more open-minded about the whole thing of reincarnation, but his dad was extremely skeptical. Because his mother was kind of interested, she began to like question him about his past life as his grandfather. So my second editing edition, that I found this to be interesting, that I only saw in this video instead of seeing it on the like websites that I was looking at. But when Gus was little, his mom asked him if he had any memories of like having siblings when he was his grandfather, and he said, "Yes, I had a sister, but she died and turned into a fish." And this obviously confused his mom, so his mom asked the father about it, and I guess the grandfather, Augustus, did have a sister, and oh, and also Gus said bad guys like did it. This was actually true. Augustus's, so like the grandfather, his sister was murdered, and she was dumped into the San Francisco Bay, so that's why his parents think that Gus got the idea of like a fish from. Super crazy and so scary. Sam said that when he was his grandmother, so I guess his wife at the time, was taking care of him before he passed away, which was accurate. Sam's mother then asked him what his grandmother used to make his grandfather to drink all of the time, and he correctly replied with milkshakes, which is just so random and like specific. His mom then pointed out the blender in their house and said, "Is this what your grandmother used to make your grandfather milkshakes out of?" Because obviously most people would assume that a blender makes sense. And he said no, and pointed to the food processor and said, "That's what my grandmother would make milkshakes out of." And apparently that was true, which is so weird because like obviously most people make milkshakes in a blender, like I said, but like I've never even heard of a milkshake being made in a food processor, let alone like a kid who's 3 years old knowing a food processor. Just really weird. So when Sam was 4 years old, his grandmother sadly passed away, and his father went to like the grandmother's house and, you know, was starting to like collect all of her items and stuff, and he brought home a bunch of old pictures. Sam's mother spread out a bunch of the old photos on the coffee table, and Sam went up to the pictures and pointed out a picture of his grandfather and said, "That's me." He then pointed to a picture of a 1949 Pontiac that literally had no one in the picture, it was just the car, and he said, "Hey, that's my car." And it ended up being the first new car that his grandfather ever bought, which is really crazy because it was obviously super special to his grandfather, and he still remembered it in this new life as Sam. So his mother really wanted to test the theory, so she gave Sam a class picture of his grandfather when he was like in elementary school, and he specifically pointed out a picture of his grandfather and said, nope, that one's me. How, like, you can't make that shit up. Like, that's crazy. Now Sam's father is no longer skeptical, and he believes that his father came through and reincarnated as his son, Sam, so that he can, you know, rebuild that emotional bond, which is kind of beautiful if you think about it, even though reincarnation does low-key freak me out. I think that's really sweet to think that, like, he feels at peace now with, like, his father passing away, because now he believes that his son is a reincarnated version of him, and also that he, like, came back to kind of just be like, love you and all of that. It's just really sweet, and now him and Sam have a really great relationship, which is just super nice. So this one was like a pretty beautiful story, and a lot happier than some of the other stories that we've talked about previously, because a lot of them are super tragic, and like kids remember dying in very tragic ways when they were in their past life, which is very similar to the next one we're going to be talking about, which is a girl named Claire from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When Claire's mother was 6 months pregnant with her, 9/11 actually happened, and her mother remembered being obviously completely shocked. Around 3 months later, she realized that, like, she had gone past her due date, and so she went to the hospital. She had like an incredibly like dangerous and really scary birth with Claire. She had to have an emergency C-section, and her and the baby almost died. But luckily everything ended up being okay, and Claire ended up actually surpassing like a lot of milestones super early for her age. Like, she began walking super early. She was literally drawing at the age of 9 months old, which I've never heard of in my life. That's like insane. Saying I've never heard of it, honestly, I don't really know much about the milestones, but 9 months seems really young to me to be drawing, but I don't know. So when Claire was around 2 years old, like, Claire had grown up being called Claire, and like her mom would also call her baby, like just normal things, but Claire began to only want to be referred to as baby. She didn't want to be called Claire because she said Claire was not her name. When her mom was like asking her why she only wanted to be called baby, it was because she wanted to stay a baby. Claire kept saying she didn't want to grow up, and she wanted to be 3 years old forever, because when she turned 3, she said that was her favorite number, and then she didn't want to have any like more growing up after that, and all of the other birthdays that she had, she would be like really stressed out. And she just really didn't want to grow up. So her parents thought this was pretty weird, but they didn't really think anything too much of it until Claire was around 8 years old. When Claire was 8, her mom and her were going to take a trip to visit her mom's sister in Texas. However, about 2 weeks before the trip, Claire started freaking out, being like, I don't want to go on a plane, I'm scared of planes, and she was just absolutely terrified, which was super weird because she had never been on a plane previously, so it kind of made no sense for her to be so scared. So her mom tried to have a discussion with her about like why she was so afraid of the plane, and she asked her like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, it's just a plane, like it's completely fine and safe. And Claire was like, no, because when I was in a building, I was hit by a plane. Claire basically claimed that she worked in an office in New York City, and a plane crashed into the building caught on fire, and she remembers people trying to like run away and they were screaming, and then that's all that she remembered. Claire also described herself in this past life as having red wavy hair and dressing up in like 1950s clothing. Like, her mom was asking her like to describe what she was wearing that day, and what she described was like 1950s clothing, which was really weird because Claire's mom claims that she like would have never seen 1950s clothing, so it was just super strange that she would even have that like memory. Her mother obviously began to suspect that, you know, a plane hitting a building in New York City, that maybe her daughter was remembering a past life in 9/11. So she decided to ask Claire like what building that she was in, because she was fully expecting her to say like the Twin Towers or like matching buildings, something similar to that. But she ended up saying the Empire State Building. Claire's mom had never heard of any plane crashing into a New York City building besides the Twin Towers, so she decided to do research of her own. She found that on July 28th, 1945, a plane actually did crash into the Empire State Building.
An Army bomber lost in the overcast had crashed into the towering Empire State Building, parts of it blasting completely through the 79th floor and landing across the street. When a count was made, 3 crewmen were dead, as well as 10 persons working in the skyscraper. 25 persons were injured in a disaster that remains the most singular in New York City.
Claire's mom showed her the research of this Empire State Building plane crash, and Claire ended up remembering more things. Like, she thought that her name was either Anne or Rose, and she also remembers having 2 children in her past life. In this episode of The Ghost Inside My Child, which you guys should totally like check out, by the way, it's super cool. They follow kids who remember their past lives. In the show, Claire and her mother decide to go to the Empire State Building to see if like she can come up with any different memories surrounding her previous life. So what was really weird about the situation is that the crash obviously actually happened, but there's like a timeline of the Empire State Building and like all the history surrounding it in the Empire State Building, and there was nothing about the crash whatsoever, which is just super strange. Luckily, the producers of The Ghost Inside My Child were able to locate the 10 names of these 10 women who passed away in the Empire State Building crash. They gave all of the names on like pieces of paper to Claire, and she ended up choosing a woman's name named Anna Gerlach. They found out she was Irish, so it was definitely a possibility that she could have had red wavy hair. Also, Anna's mother's name was Rose, which is like super crazy because she had came up with the name Anne and Rose, and Anna and Rose like pretty similar. As well as she remembered the fact because Anna actually did have 2 children, which is just so crazy that she remembered all of these things and it was like actually accurate. But yeah, that story honestly really freaked me out, like, because that's just so hard to like not believe. It's really sad and really weird that the Empire State Building has like no information about that, the fact that that happened. Like, obviously like you can find information on like Google and stuff, but just in the actual building, like there's a whole timeline of the history of the Empire State Building. Like, you'd think that that would be kind of important. It's just weird that I feel like they're trying to erase what happened. So I don't know, super interesting though. But that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of these reincarnation stories. And if you have any reincarnation stories, or if any family members have had any, I would love to read them in the comments below. But yeah, that is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram because I'm always posting really dope ass shit on there. Subscribe for new videos every week, and I will see you guys later. Bye!